The sky over Savannah, Georgia, was clear, with the afternoon sun painting the horizon orange as Dylan Anderson parked his car in front of the imposing Armitage family estate. His eyes climbed the white columns of the mansion, rising like a relic from the past, surrounded by tall trees and an ornate wrought iron fence. The vastness of the house was intimidating, but he took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that had been gnawing at him since he accepted Eva's invitation. Dylan was a 24-year-old engineering student, ambitious and determined. In the 6 months he had been dating Eva, he had never felt as anxious as he did that day. Meeting his girlfriend's family always brought some kind of apprehension, but there was something more to it. Perhaps it was the fact that Eva came from a wealthy, white family while he had grown up in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta. Eva smiled as she opened the car door and stepped out gracefully. She was radiant, as always, her floral dress fluttering in the wind. "Welcome to the Armitage household, Mr. Dylan Anderson," she said playfully, taking his hand. "Are you ready to be pampered for the weekend?" Dylan let out a nervous laugh and squeezed her hand. "Ready is a strong word," he replied, trying to mask his unease. "But I'm looking forward to meeting your family." She gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, pulling him by the arm toward the entrance. "They're going to love you, I promise." As they walked through the entrance lined with perfectly manicured gardens, Dylan took in his surroundings, trying to absorb every detail. The feeling of discomfort continued to swell within him, but he pushed it aside, convinced that it would just take some time for him to relax. Upon entering the mansion, they were greeted by Dean Armitage, Eva's father, who was waiting for them in the living room. Dean was a man in his 50s, with a wide smile that seemed a bit forced. He approached with long, firm strides, extending his hand to Dylan. "Dylan!" Dean exclaimed, shaking his hand with excessive energy. "Finally! Eva has told us so much about you. Welcome to our humble abode." "Thank you very much, Mr. Armitage," Dylan replied, noticing the strength in the handshake and the intense gaze of Dean, who seemed to size him up from head to toe. Missy Armitage, Eva's mother, appeared shortly after, wearing a warm smile and elegant posture. She approached with open arms. "It's so nice to meet you, dear," she said, pulling Dylan into a quick, yet uncomfortable hug. "Eva has said wonderful things about you. We're lucky she found someone so special." Dylan smiled, still trying to adjust to the excessive warmth he was receiving. "She's really special to me, too," he said. The Armitage's hospitality felt a bit over the top. It was as if they were trying too hard to make him comfortable, and deep down, it made him feel even more out of place. Noticing Dylan's discomfort, Eva smiled and interjected. "Let's get settled in the guest room, and then we can have dinner, okay?" Dean nodded enthusiastically. Sure. Make yourself at home, Dylan. Here, your family." As Eva led him through the expansive hallways of the mansion, Dylan noticed several old portraits lining the walls. There was something familiar about their eyes, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. It was as if those gazes followed him, cold and calculating. "Your parents are really welcoming," he said, with a nervous chuckle, as they entered the room. "They're just excited I found someone like you," Eva replied, smiling as she arranged some clothes. "Don't worry. They can be a little intense at first, but you'll get used to it." Dylan tried to relax. After all, he was there to spend a weekend with the woman he loved. What could possibly go wrong? But something in the air, something in the looks, told him that this weekend would be anything but ordinary. The next morning at the Armitage estate was bathed in soft light filtering through the curtains of the guest room where Dylan had spent the night. The silence of the house only heightened his sense of discomfort, as if something was amiss. He got up and slipped on a t-shirt, ready to face the day, still trying to shake off the anxieties that had followed him since his arrival. As he descended for breakfast, Dylan was surprised by the size of the table already set in the dining room. Fresh fruits, pancakes, eggs, and toast filled every corner of the long wooden table. "Good morning," Missy Armitage said, appearing almost like a ghost to his left, with an overly wide smile. "I hope you slept well, Dylan." He turned quickly, startled by her closeness. "Yes, I slept well, thank you," he replied, making an effort to sound natural, even as he felt the weight of their exaggerated hospitality. Dean Armitage sat at the table with a cup of coffee in hand, observing intently as Dylan approached. "I hope you're hungry, kid." "We might have gone a little overboard with breakfast," Dean said, gesturing to the overflowing table. "Yeah, definitely," Dylan replied, laughing nervously. "I've never seen such a complete breakfast spread." "Thank you." He sat down and began to serve himself, trying to ignore the nearly constant stares he felt from Dean and Missy. The silence between conversations was filled only by the soft clinking of silverware and the fixed smiles of the Armitages. Eva, who had come down shortly after Dylan, noticed his discomfort and tried to lighten the mood. "They really get excited when we have guests," Eva said, offering him a warm smile as she reached out to touch his shoulder. "But it's okay, babe. You'll get used to this, over-the-top hospitality." Dylan let out a soft laugh, but the discomfort was still palpable. "It's just, I'm not used to this much attention. But seriously, it's all great." Dean smiled broadly, almost inappropriately, before leaning slightly forward. "You know, Dylan," he began, stirring his coffee in the cup, "we've always been very open to all kinds of people. We never cared about things like skin color, if you know what I mean. What matters is character, right?" The phrase hung in the air, loaded with intentions Dylan couldn't fully decipher. He glanced at Eva, who gave him an encouraging smile, as if to say this was all normal. "Of course," Dylan replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Character is what defines a person." Missy, who was sitting next to Dean, interrupted. "Exactly, dear. And you seem to have a wonderful character. Eva was lucky to find someone like you. Young, strong, determined. It's exactly what we've always wanted for her." Dylan swallowed hard, noticing the compliment masked as an intrusive comment. There was something strange in the way she looked at him. It was as if she were evaluating more than just his upbringing or personality. Georgina, the housekeeper, entered the room carrying a tray of juice. She was a black woman, with an oddly impassive expression on her face. Her eyes met Dylan's for a brief moment, but she quickly looked away, almost as if she were avoiding some kind of connection. There was something cold and distant in her posture that Dylan couldn't quite understand. "Dylan, would you mind helping me take a walk around the property later?" Dean asked, abruptly changing the subject. "I want to show you the gardens and tell you some stories about our family. I'm sure you'll like it." Dylan forced a smile, even though his intuition screamed that something was wrong. "Sure, Mr. Armitage. It would be a pleasure." Dean stood up, clapping his hands once. "Great. Eva, dear, you can go with Missy to do some shopping in town. Leave Dylan with me today. We men need to get to know each other better." Eva hesitated for a moment, looking at Dylan. But before she could protest, Missy was already pulling her toward the door. "It'll be quick, dear," Missy said. "Let the men bond." Dylan nodded, trying to hide the nervousness now consuming him. He found himself alone in the dining room with Dean, who was watching him in a calculating manner. Dean flashed an enigmatic smile and placed his hand on Dylan's shoulder. "Let's take a walk, kid. There's a lot I want to show you." Dylan and Dean Armitage walked in silence through the vast gardens of the property. The wind blew gently, swaying the trees around them as the sounds of crickets and birds filled the air. Dylan's hands were shoved in his pockets, trying to disguise his unease. Dean walked beside him, relaxed, but with a presence that made the young man feel constantly scrutinized. "So, Dylan," Dean began, breaking the silence in an almost calculated way. "What do you think about human evolution?" The question was so unexpected that Dylan paused for a second, furrowing his brow. "Human evolution?" he repeated, glancing sideways at Dean. Well, I'd say it's how we, as a species, adapt and change over time, right? Dean smiled, shaking his head slowly. Exactly, he replied, in a way that made Dylan's skin crawl. I've always wondered how some people seem more adapted than others. Don't you think? There's something fascinating about physical traits. You, for example, Dylan. You look strong and healthy. If you could choose, would you want to live forever like this? Dylan laughed nervously, unsure how to respond to such a strange question. Live forever? I don't think so, he replied. Everyone ages, right? That's part of life. Dean studied him for a moment, as if analyzing each word. Yes, it is part of life, he echoed, with a cryptic smile. But some of us prefer to make the most of what we have. Longevity, health. Nature gives us these blessings, and some of us are more fortunate. Dylan tried to ignore the growing discomfort, looking at the gardens around him. The property seemed almost infinite, with its tall hedges forming small green mazes. This place is huge, he commented, trying to change the subject. Do you take care of all this by yourselves? Dean chuckled softly. We have help. Georgina and Walter handle most of it, he replied, referring to the housekeeper and the gardener. They're like part of the family. The two continued walking until they reached a clearing, where a small, old guesthouse stood, partially hidden by trees. Dean gestured toward the house with his head. This used to be the servants' quarters, back in my grandparents' time, he said, with an almost nostalgic tone. But now, we use it to store some family things. Nothing special. Dylan looked at the small building with curiosity. It looks pretty old. Do you still keep things in there? Dean shrugged, smiling strangely. Oh, old documents, family mementos. Nothing that would interest someone from the outside. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken tension until Dean spoke again, this time in a lighter tone. So, Dylan, do you think you can take care of my daughter? Eva is very important to us. The question came with an intensity disguised as casual, as if it were loaded with expectations Dylan still didn't fully understand. I will do my best, Dylan replied, trying to keep his tone steady. I love her, and I want her to be happy. Dean smiled again, this time with something darker in his gaze. I'm glad to hear that. But remember, Dylan, there are things you still don't understand. Things that go beyond what the eyes can see. Dylan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of Dean's words. With each minute in that place, the sense that something sinister was unfolding only grew. Before he could ask what exactly Dean meant by that, the sound of footsteps caught their attention. Walter, the gardener, appeared in the distance, watching them from afar with an impassive expression. Dean waved at Walter, who didn't respond, only continuing his work in the garden. Well, I think it's time to head back to the house. I don't want Missy to think I'm monopolizing you, Dean said with a forced laugh, completely changing his demeanor. She'll want your help preparing dinner. Dylan nodded, relieved to end that strange conversation. But as they walked back to the mansion, he couldn't shake off Dean's words. Things that go beyond what the eyes can see. What did he mean by that? While walking beside Dean, Dylan felt a growing unease, as if he were trapped in a game whose rules he didn't yet understand. Night quickly fell over the Armitage estate, shrouding everything in an even more mysterious atmosphere. Dylan, feeling the tension from the odd walk with Dean, mentally prepared for dinner. He sensed that each interaction with the family raised more questions than answers. When he entered the dining room, the table was already set, and Missy, Dean, and Eva were seated, casually chatting. The air felt heavy, as if everyone was aware of something Dylan didn't know. Georgina, the housekeeper, moved silently through the rooms, her expression serene yet almost cold. When she passed by Dylan, he tried to make eye contact, but yet again, she avoided his gaze. Ah, Dylan! Dean exclaimed, as if seeing him for the first time that night. Please, have a seat. We're just about to serve dinner. Dylan sat down next to Eva, who smiled at him, attempting to break the ice. They make a big deal out of dinners when we have guests, she said softly, touching his hand. Yes, I noticed, he replied, forcing a tense smile. The conversation at the table started casually, with Dean asking about Dylan's future and career. But there was an underlying tone, an insistence in the questions that felt more than mere curiosity. So, Dylan, you're studying to be a physical therapist, right? Dean asked, slicing into his meat. It must be a fascinating field, with all those questions about the human body, mobility, physical resilience. Dylan nodded, popping a piece of potato into his mouth. Yeah, it's interesting. I love being able to help people regain their health and quality of life. Dean smiled, but there was something unsettling about that smile. That's admirable, he said, looking directly into Dylan's eyes. The human body is a fascinating machine, don't you think? The ability to regenerate, adapt, to be enhanced. Dylan paused, looking sideways at Eva, who seemed distracted by her phone. Enhanced, he repeated, trying to keep the tone light. Missy, who had been silent until then, chimed in. Yes, dear, the human body is incredible. Imagine if we could live forever in healthy, perfect bodies, without the limitations that nature imposes. Dylan laughed nervously. Yeah, that would be interesting. But I think part of life is aging and dealing with those changes, right? He glanced at Eva, seeking some support, but she appeared absorbed in something else. Missy smiled kindly, but there was a coldness behind that kindness. Yes, dear, of course. We all deal with it in different ways, she said, her gaze fixed on Dylan for a moment too long. Before he could continue the conversation, Jeremy, Eva's brother, entered the room. He moved with a different energy than the other family members, more aggressive, yet more relaxed. Oh, so you're the Dylan, Jeremy said, sitting down with a sudden movement. Eva talked a lot about you. Dylan, a bit taken aback by Jeremy's directness, nodded. Yeah, and you must be Jeremy. Nice to meet you. Jeremy flashed a smile that didn't reach his eyes and leaned forward. Let me ask you something, man. Do you work out? He asked abruptly, staring at Dylan's body as if evaluating him. Dylan frowned, surprised by the question. Yeah. I go to the gym every now and then. Jeremy let out a low, almost mocking laugh. Figured as much. I can tell. Bet you're strong, agile, resilient. Dylan offered a half smile, unsettled by Jeremy's invasive demeanor. Yeah, I try to stay in shape. Dean and Missy observed the interaction with interest, as if they were watching a scripted scene unfold. Missy, in particular, seemed pleased with the direction the conversation was taking. Jeremy, be nice to our guest, Missy said, but without real concern in her voice. Don't scare him. Jeremy leaned back in his chair, still wearing that smile. Oh, come on. I'm just trying to get to know him better. After all, Eva has good taste, right? Dylan laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. Eva, finally pulling her eyes away from her phone, looked at him and noticed his discomfort. Jeremy, cut it out, she said, her tone serious. You always do this. Jeremy raised his hands in surrender. Okay. I'm not causing any trouble, he said before abruptly getting up. I'll grab a drink. Anyone want one? Missy and Dean shook their heads, and Jeremy left the room, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Dean looked at Dylan with a calm smile. Don't worry about Jeremy. He's a bit intense, but he has a good heart. Dylan nodded, but something inside him screamed that there was more to this family than he was able to see. What were they trying to hide? And why did it seem like everyone except Eva was testing him in some way? As the night wore on, the feeling of being in the midst of a mental game only grew. Dylan felt as if he were being evaluated, every move and every word carefully watched. And despite the smiles and casual conversations, he knew the true face of the Armitage family had yet to be revealed. The next morning, Dylan woke up with a sense of unease. The previous night had been too strange, and the dinner conversation kept replaying in his mind. The looks, the forced smiles, and especially Jeremy's unsettling behavior put him on high alert. He went downstairs, trying to be quiet, and found Eva already in the kitchen. She was making coffee, seemingly relaxed, oblivious to the tension Dylan carried. "Good morning, did you sleep well?" Eva asked, smiling at him. Dylan hesitated before answering. "I slept, but I had some strange dreams." He approached the counter, grabbing a coffee mug. "Last night's dinner was interesting." Eva laughed but didn't seem surprised. "Yeah, my parents can be a bit different with visitors. But I swear they liked you." Dylan took a sip of his coffee, unconvinced. "It's not just that, Eva. Something strange is going on here. Your brother, your mom, even your dad, it felt like they were trying to test me in some way. I can't explain it, but I felt watched." Eva's expression turned serious for a moment, her smile fading. "Dylan, you're exaggerating. I told you my family can be eccentric, but they don't have any bad intentions. They just want to protect me, you know." She gently placed her hand on his arm as if trying to calm him. "I love you, and they just want to make sure you're the right guy for me." Dylan shook his head, trying to shake off the discomfort. "I hope that's all it is," he said, looking out the window at the vast, isolated property. "It's just that. I feel like there's more to this story." Before Eva could respond, Missy entered the kitchen with her disconcerting, soft smile. "Oh, Dylan," she said in her calm voice. "I was thinking about you. How about a relaxation session this morning? I can help you with those strange dreams." Dylan looked at her, his heart racing. He didn't know why, but the thought of being alone with Missy put him on high alert. "No, thanks, Missy. I'm feeling better already," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Missy tilted her head as if studying him. "That's fine, dear, but if you change your mind, I'll be in the office. Hypnosis can work wonders for stress." She smiled again and left the kitchen, leaving Dylan feeling more unsettled. Eva laughed again, trying to lighten the mood. "My mom and her hypnosis. She believes it can cure anything." Dylan tried to relax, but the sense that something was deeply wrong lingered. Later that morning, he decided to explore the property to understand what was bothering him. As he wandered through the gardens, he approached the back house where the family's staff lived. Georgina was in the garden, watering the plants. Dylan watched her for a moment, remembering how she always acted strangely around him. He decided to try talking to her. "Hey, Georgina," he called, approaching her. She turned slowly, her polite smile vacant, as if her expression were frozen. "Hello, Mr. Dylan. How are you today?" Her voice was calm, but there was something inauthentic about her words. Dylan hesitated but decided to be direct. "Yesterday, during dinner, I felt that something was different here. Do you feel that too?" Georgina blinked several times, and for a moment, her expression seemed to shift, as if a spark of panic crossed her eyes. "Oh, sir, everything is fine here. Everything's perfect, really. I've taken care of this house for many years, and the Armitage family has always been very good to me." She smiled, but the smile didn't match the light in her eyes. Dylan furrowed his brow, suspicious. "Georgina, if there's something you want to tell me, you can trust me." She seemed to hesitate for a moment but quickly composed herself. "There's nothing, sir." Then, without warning, she started to laugh, a shrill laugh that sounded completely out of place. Dylan stepped back, feeling even more uneasy. "All right. I'll let you get back to work," he said, backing away quickly. As he headed back to the main house, a voice called out to him. Dude, you shouldn't be talking to her. It was Jeremy, watching him from a distance with an intense, challenging look. Dylan frowned. I was just trying to have a conversation. What's the problem? Jeremy approached slowly, a provocative smile on his face. Georgina, she's different. She's very loyal to my family, you know. We don't want anyone confusing her. Dylan felt the threatening tone in Jeremy's words and decided not to prolong the conversation. All right, Jeremy. I'll head back inside. As he walked away, Jeremy shouted after him. Hey, Dylan, be careful. Sometimes things here might not be what they seem. Dylan paused for a second but kept walking, now more certain that something sinister was happening in that house. And he needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. Dylan could no longer ignore the signs. The feeling that something horrible was about to happen consumed him. After the strange encounter with Georgina and Jeremy's veiled threat, he knew he could no longer trust anyone in that house, not even Eva. In the afternoon, he decided to explore more of the Armitage house, hoping to find a clue that would reveal what was going on. As he walked through the quiet hallways, his eyes landed on a locked door at the end of the corridor, near Eva's father's office. His instincts told him there was something important behind it. Dylan glanced around to make sure no one was nearby and started fiddling with the lock. Fortunately, the door wasn't locked. He opened it slowly and stepped into a dark, stuffy room. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized he was in a sort of study. But what truly caught his attention was a series of folders stacked up. He opened the first folder, and what he saw horrified him. It contained photos of black men and women, all in everyday situations, but with one thing in common: each of them had disappeared. Next to the photos were detailed notes about each person's life. Among those images, Dylan found pictures of himself. It was clear he was being watched, too. This is a trap, he murmured, feeling his heart race. Before he could process what he had just discovered, he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly closed the folder and hid behind a heavy curtain in the corner of the room. The door opened, and Missy walked in, followed by Dean Armitage. We need to continue the process with Dylan soon, before he suspects too much, Missy said in a low voice. I'm already preparing everything. Eva is doing a great job keeping him close. He has no idea what's coming, Dean replied, his voice calm as if he were discussing a routine task. Dylan felt sweat trickling down his forehead. He was in the middle of something much bigger than he had imagined. Missy's voice filled the room again. The preparations for the consciousness transfer are almost ready. He will be next. Dylan's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process what he was hearing. Consciousness transfer. This was unbelievable. They were planning to do something to him, something involving hypnosis and body theft. Missy and Dean left the room, and Dylan waited a few minutes before coming out of hiding. He knew he had little time to act. He raced through the hallways, determined to confront Eva. When he reached her room, he knocked hard on the door. Eva, I need to talk to you now. Eva opened the door with a confused expression. Dylan, what's going on? Why are you so worked up? He stepped into the room, shutting the door behind him. I heard your parents talking, Eva. They're planning something terrible with me. And I found these photos, he said, showing her the images he had taken from the office. This isn't normal. Eva looked at the photos, and for a brief moment, her face went pale, but she quickly regained her composure. Dylan. You're exaggerating. My parents are different, yes, but they wouldn't do anything to hurt you. You must be tired, maybe that's it. No, Eva, he shouted, interrupting her. I heard your mom say they're going to transfer my consciousness to someone else. This isn't fatigue, it's real. And you knew all along, didn't you? Eva hesitated, averting her gaze. Eva, please. I trusted you, you knew the whole time. She took a deep breath and finally responded, her voice cold and calculated. Yes, Dylan. I knew. Dylan's world crumbled in that instant. He took a step back, unable to believe what he was hearing. Why? He asked, his voice choked with pain and shock. Eva shrugged, her expression completely different from the girl he thought he knew. Because this is what I do. I bring young people like you into my family. You are perfect. And now it's your turn. Dylan felt a shiver run down his spine. Everything he feared was confirmed. He was trapped, and Eva, the woman he thought he loved, was part of it all. You're sick, he yelled, backing away toward the door. Eva just watched him with a disturbing calmness. It's no use, Dylan. There's no way to escape. Everyone who came before you tried, but they failed. You will fail too. Desperate, Dylan opened the door and bolted down the hallway, his heart racing as he tried to find a way out. The house, once just uncomfortable, now felt like a prison. As Dylan ran through the living room, Dean Armitage appeared in the doorway with a cold smile. Where do you think you're going, Dylan? Dean asked, crossing his arms in a menacing manner. Stay away from me. Dylan shouted, taking a step back, searching for an escape route. Dean stepped forward, his voice remaining calm as if he were dealing with a trivial issue. There's no need to make this difficult. I know you must be confused right now, but everything we're doing is for your good, and ours. You'll understand soon. Dylan couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could this family think something so sinister was justifiable? He slowly backed away, keeping his eyes on Dean. You're monsters. I'm not just a body for you to steal. Before he could think of his next move, Missy appeared beside Dean with an equally calm expression. Dylan, she began, her voice soothing and almost maternal, why are you resisting? Everything we're doing is offering you a new life, an opportunity you'd never have outside of here. He glared at her in anger. A new life? You want to erase me and replace me? This is madness. Missy raised her hand calmly. Come now, Dylan. We just need to talk, she said as she started to gently swing a teaspoon against its saucer, the same hypnotic sound that had left him dazed and unable to think clearly. Dylan, already familiar with what was happening, shook his head violently. No. Not this time. He forced himself not to look at the spoon and ran in the opposite direction. Dylan dashed through the house and found a staircase leading down to the basement. He hesitated for a moment, but there was no time to think. He quickly descended, his footsteps echoing off the damp walls. When he reached the bottom, he was met with a terrifying sight. The basement was equipped with strange machines and a surgical table in the center of the room. There were videos and detailed notes outlining the consciousness transfer procedure. Dylan saw a board with photos of various black men and women, all with notes saying, procedure completed. They were the previous victims. Oh my God! Dylan whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Suddenly, he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. He hid behind a large cabinet and watched as Jeremy, Eva's brother, entered the basement, holding a lacrosse stick and wearing a sinister grin. Hey, Dylan, Jeremy taunted, tapping the bat in his hands. Ready for the show? You're gonna love the next part. Dylan knew he didn't have time to hide or wait. He needed to fight. Grabbing a sharp tool he found on the ground, he waited until Jeremy was close enough. As Jeremy approached, Dylan struck, hitting the bat and dodging the blow, leaving Jeremy momentarily stunned. Seizing the chance, Dylan took off running again, sprinting up the stairs as fast as he could. When he reached the upper floor, he almost collided with Eva, who was waiting for him with a frustrated look. You're not getting away, Dylan, she said, her voice laced with a mix of anger and disappointment. Everyone's tried. No one succeeds. Dylan paused for a second, panting, looking directly into Eva's eyes. How can you do this? I trusted you. I thought you loved me. Eva sighed, and for a moment, it seemed she might show some remorse. This isn't about love, Dylan. It's about power. It's about survival. Her voice was now hard and relentless. You're just a means to an end. With a broken heart and blood boiling, Dylan responded firmly. I'm not just a body to be used. And I'm getting out of here. With that, he took off running through the house, heading for the front door, while the sound of heavy footsteps and shouts followed him. Reaching the front door, he found Dean and Missy blocking his way. This is the end of the line, Dylan, Dean said calmly. You have nowhere to go. Dylan looked at them, breathing heavily, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on him. It may seem that way, he said in a strained voice, but I'm going to fight until the end. I will never let you win. Missy began to shake the teaspoon again, but before she could take action, Dylan grabbed a nearby glass table and smashed it, breaking eye contact and creating a distraction. He ran toward a window, shattered the glass, and jumped outside. His escape wasn't without its difficulties, but now he was out of the house, injured but determined to survive. Dylan landed on the lawn outside the mansion, panting and with his body hurt from the fall. The cold of the night enveloped him as he tried to gather himself and decide on his next move. He knew he couldn't stop, not for a second. I need to get out of here, he thought, as his eyes scanned the surroundings. But how? The Armitage estate was sprawling, surrounded by tall trees and dense woods. The silence of the night was shattered by distant voices. The Armitage family was already on his tail. Where is he? Jeremy shouted, his voice echoing across the property. He can't have gone far. Dylan started running, ignoring the pain in his body. His feet sank into the damp grass as he headed for the forest, knowing he had to hide before it was too late. The trees closed in around him, creating near-total darkness. As he ran, he could hear Jeremy and the others closing in. The sound of branches snapping underfoot and their heavy breathing heightened his anxiety. Suddenly, Dylan heard a familiar sound, the engine of a car. He stopped for a second, listening intently. There, on the gravel driveway, he spotted a car approaching. He recognized it immediately. It was Marcus's car. Marcus! Dylan shouted, running toward the car. Marcus, I'm here. The car came to a screeching halt, and Marcus jumped out with a confused and alarmed expression. Dylan. Dude, what's going on? You look all beat up. Marcus said, moving closer to his friend. It's her family, Marcus. They're crazy. Dylan replied, out of breath. They're kidnapping black people, doing something horrible to us, to our bodies. We need to get out of here now. Before Marcus could respond, Jeremy and Dean appeared, running across the lawn, armed with bats and knives. Stop them! Dean shouted, pointing toward Dylan and Marcus. Don't let them escape. Marcus glanced at the approaching men and, without hesitation, threw open the car door. Get in, quick! He yelled, revving the engine. Dylan ran to the car and jumped into the passenger seat, panting and nervously looking back as Jeremy got closer. Go, Marcus! Step on it! Dylan shouted, desperate. The car started moving, but Jeremy managed to swing his bat against the rear window, shattering the glass. Marcus yelled and accelerated even harder, swerving over the gravel as he tried to maintain control. What the hell is going on? Marcus asked, panicked, as he drove down the road leading out of the estate. Dylan looked at his friend with wide eyes, trying to explain what he had just experienced. They hypnotize us, Marcus. Her family, they use our bodies. They transfer their minds into us, like possession. Eva brought me here for that, man. She does this with all her black boyfriends. Marcus looked at Dylan with a mix of horror and disbelief. Are you serious? This is insane. I saw everything, Marcus. The lab in the basement, the videos, the other victims. They've been doing this for years. As Marcus drove, they heard the sound of sirens getting closer. Dylan looked back and saw flashing red and blue lights in the distance. "Oh no. The police," Dylan whispered, his heart sinking. "Maybe that's a good thing, right?" Marcus said uncertainly. "They can help us." But Dylan knew that for him, the police rarely meant help. He saw the lights approaching and felt a chill run down his spine. A police car intercepted them, forcing Marcus to stop. Two white officers emerged from the vehicle, guns drawn. "Hands where I can see them," shouted one of the officers, his face serious and his weapon aimed directly at Dylan and Marcus. "Wait, we can explain." Marcus tried, raising his hands. Dylan attempted to stay calm, knowing that any wrong move could be fatal. "We're the victims here," Dylan shouted, trying to be heard. "They're after us, the Armitage family." Before he could finish, the other officer stepped closer, keeping his gun up. "The victims, huh?" the officer asked, his tone cynical. "You know how you two look right now? Like criminals trying to run away from something." Dylan swallowed hard, watching the tension rise. He knew he couldn't fully trust these officers, but he needed to do something. "They're hunting me, the Armitage family," Dylan started to explain, but he was cut off as another car approached. It was Jeremy and Dean, speeding in an SUV. Jeremy jumped out of the car, feigning concern. "Officers, I'm the owner of this property. These two men broke into my house. They're trying to escape after attacking us." Dylan looked on incredulously as the world seemed to turn upside down. Jeremy and Dean were twisting the narrative against him and Marcus. "That's a lie," Marcus shouted, but was quickly restrained by the officers. The police hesitated for a moment but ultimately ended up handcuffing Marcus. One officer looked at Dylan with suspicion. "We're taking you too, just for precaution," said the officer, pulling the cuffs tight around him. Dylan felt the weight of injustice and rage building inside him. Even after escaping the house, the nightmare was far from over. He was shoved into the police car forcefully, his hands cuffed behind his back, while Marcus was taken to another vehicle. The sound of sirens still buzzed in his ears, and the bitter taste of injustice spread across his mouth. He knew he needed to find a way out of this situation, but the truth was twisted, and the power was against him. "You have to believe me," Dylan yelled as one of the officers slammed the door shut. "They're behind all this." The officer, a middle-aged white man, just shook his head, ignoring Dylan's desperation as he walked back to the patrol car. Jeremy and Dean watched closely, and Dylan noticed the subtle smiles they exchanged. They were enjoying the situation, and it made him sick. Inside the car, Dylan looked around frantically, trying to find a way to escape. He knew that if he was taken to the station, his chance of getting out would drop drastically. They would manipulate the evidence, twist the facts, and he would end up being accused of a crime he didn't commit. He knew how these stories ended. As the car began to move, Jeremy leaned in toward the officer driving. "I want to thank you for everything, officer. These two intruders attacked us, and my family is completely shaken up." The officer nodded without a word, clearly accepting Jeremy's version. "Don't worry, Mr. Armitage. We'll take care of this. They're going to pay for what they did." Dylan heard their conversation from the back seat and felt his anger grow inside him. It was as if the world was conspiring against him. They had so much power, so much influence, and he was just another black man that no one would believe. "You're all in this together," Dylan shouted, banging his head against the glass. "I'm not the one who should be here, it's you, Jeremy." Jeremy glanced at Dylan for a second, his smile slowly fading. "There's no point in shouting, Dylan," Jeremy said calmly, stepping closer to the police car window. "You've already lost. You've always lost." Dylan felt a chill run down his spine. It was the coldness in Jeremy's voice that scared him the most. He wasn't just dealing with a disturbed family, he was up against people who had perfected this game of power and manipulation for years. But Dylan knew that giving up wasn't an option. As the car moved along the dark road leading to the city, an idea began to form in Dylan's mind. He couldn't fight them physically, not in that situation, but maybe he could turn the tables in another way. He knew his only chance of survival was to force someone outside to see the truth. "Please, you have to listen to me," he pleaded with the officer driving. "The Armitage family, they're behind a horrible conspiracy. They're kidnapping black people and transferring their minds into white bodies. It's real. I saw it with my own eyes." The officer let out a short laugh, clearly skeptical. "Oh, really?" he said, looking in the rearview mirror at Dylan. "Minds being transferred into other bodies? Sounds like a good story for a movie, partner." Dylan knew he sounded insane, but it was the truth. Despair tried to creep in, but he wouldn't let it. There was a small window of opportunity, and he had to fight with everything he had. "Look, I know this sounds crazy," Dylan continued, his voice calmer now, trying to sound rational. "But you can search their house. Go down to the basement. They have videos, equipment, everything is there. Just give me a chance to prove it." The officer glanced in the rearview mirror again, and this time, he seemed to hesitate, perhaps sensing the sincerity in Dylan's voice. But before he could respond, the car radio began to crackle. "Central to all units, we have a report of a home invasion at the Armitage property. Reinforcements needed." Jeremy exchanged a quick glance with the officer, and he pressed down on the accelerator, making it clear that Dylan's fate was out of his hands. As the car passed through the gates of the property and approached the station, Dylan felt the weight of the situation. The world seemed to be closing in around him, but he knew that somehow, he had to survive that night. When the car finally stopped in front of the station, the officer got out, opening the door for Dylan. His eyes met Jeremy's one last time before he was taken inside, and Jeremy's cold, satisfied expression made Dylan's stomach churn. "This won't last forever, Jeremy," Dylan said, his gaze steady. "The truth always comes out." Jeremy just shrugged. "Maybe. But for now, I'm the one in control." Dylan was shoved inside the station, his mind racing in search of a plan, anything that could help him escape this deadly trap. He knew his fight wasn't over, in fact, it was just beginning. Dylan sat in a dark, cold cell at the station, his hands still cuffed as chaotic thoughts swirled in his mind. The weight of injustice pressed down on his shoulders, and he struggled to process the series of events that had brought him there. He knew he needed to act quickly before the situation became irreversible. "We're not going to stay here forever, right?" Marcus said, his friend who was also locked up in the neighboring cell. His voice sounded hopeful, but Dylan could sense the underlying tension. "I don't know, Marcus," Dylan replied, running a hand through his hair. "The police seem to believe the Armitage family's version of events. They're going to try to pin this on us. But what if we can prove they're behind this?" Marcus insisted. "You mentioned the recordings. If we can just get someone to see them." "The problem is that no one seems to want to hear the truth," Dylan interrupted, frustration evident in his voice. "I tried talking to the officer, and he just laughed at me." At that moment, the cell door swung open, and an officer stepped in. It was the same one who had taken Dylan inside, and his skeptical gaze was hard to miss. "Come on, you two," the officer said, gesturing with his hand. "Time to get you out. The judge is waiting." Dylan and Marcus exchanged confused glances as they left the cell, a sense of impending struggle hanging over them. Once outside, they were taken to an interrogation room, where the white officer driving the patrol car was waiting. "Take a seat," the officer ordered, indicating a table in the center of the room. Dylan and Marcus sat down, and the officer began to speak. "Listen, your story doesn't add up. All we have here are the words of the Armitage family and a report of violence." "They're lying," Dylan exclaimed, anger boiling inside him. They kidnapped black teenagers and are planning something terrible. I saw everything. The officer merely rolled his eyes, clearly skeptical. Look, I don't have time for conspiracy theories, boys. If you don't have concrete evidence, I'm going to have to charge you with trespassing and assault. Marcus raised his hand, as if it could calm the situation. Please, just give us a chance. If you really investigate the Armitage family, you'll see that something far more sinister is going on. The officer shook his head, clearly uninterested. I can't sit here listening to wild stories. If there's nothing else, you're free to go to court. Dylan felt a chill in his stomach. They were sinking deeper, and the only exit seemed to be growing more distant. But he knew he couldn't give up. You know what they're doing, right? Dylan challenged, his voice firm. You need to look beyond what's right in front of you. The officer hesitated for a moment, perhaps considering the seriousness of Dylan's words, but quickly reverted to his skepticism. I don't have time for that. Back to your cell. As soon as the officer turned away, Dylan felt a wave of despair wash over him. He couldn't just sit here, waiting for things to resolve themselves. He needed a plan. Marcus, we need to find a way to escape, Dylan whispered, urgency in his voice. We can't let it end like this. What if we could get someone from the outside to know what's happening? Marcus suggested. Maybe someone from the media. Dylan thought quickly. The media could be a way to bring the truth to light, but who would believe them? The idea of involving a lawyer also crossed his mind. Yeah, but how are we going to manage that? We're stuck here with no contact with the outside world. The door opened again, and a woman entered, radiating a determination that Dylan didn't expect. It was Eva, his girlfriend, and the concern on her face was palpable. Dylan, she exclaimed, rushing to the table. I'm here to help you. Eva, you shouldn't be here, Dylan said, alarmed. They could put you in danger. I don't care, she replied, her eyes blazing with determination. I can't let this happen. I was the one who brought you to the house. I'm so sorry. What do you know about what they're doing? Dylan asked, searching for answers. Eva hesitated but then spoke in a low, trembling voice. The truth is that my family believes they're genetically superior. They have a plan. I didn't know what they were really doing until you showed up. They told me everything would be done with the victim's consent, but it's a lie. They want to control minds, Dylan. Dylan froze, Eva's revelation cutting deep. He felt a mix of relief and pain, relief that someone finally believed him, and pain that his own girlfriend was involved in something so nefarious. Eva, you need to help us get out of here and tell the world, he said, urgency thick in his voice. If we can do that, we can stop this madness. I'll do whatever it takes, Dylan. But we need to act fast, Eva said, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. The police are already being influenced by them, and we can't trust anyone here. Adrenaline began to flow through Dylan's veins, and he realized that despite all the adversity, there was a glimmer of hope. With Eva's help, he could gather the evidence they needed and expose the truth about the Armitage family. Let's do this, he said firmly, looking into her eyes. The fight isn't over, but together, we can win this battle. And so, with renewed determination and a plan starting to take shape, they prepared to face the challenge ahead, ready to unveil the truth behind the dark conspiracy. Dylan and Eva found themselves in a small hotel room, far from the precinct but still on high alert. The lights of Portland twinkled in the distance as the sounds of traffic echoed through the streets. The weight of the situation pressed down on their shoulders, but now, with a plan in mind, Dylan's resolve solidified. We need to gather everything we've got before we go to the press, Dylan said, his voice steady. He was seated in a chair, examining the documents Eva had managed to hide before they escaped. Eva nodded, her eyes filled with concern. I still have some messages and recordings on my phone. While I was at the house, I managed to capture some of my family's conversations. They could be the proof we need. Dylan felt a flutter of hope at the thought that they might have real evidence. Great, that's essential. We need to get all of this organized. The media won't listen to us without something concrete. Eva took a deep breath, nervous. I know it's risky, but what if they find out we're here? What will happen to us? We have to be quick and cautious. We can't let fear hold us back from acting, Dylan replied, determined. We'll do this together. However, just as they were working in silence, Eva's phone rang, breaking the tension in the air. She glanced at the screen and saw it was her mother. A shiver ran down her spine. Are you going to answer? Dylan asked, noticing her discomfort. Maybe I should, Eva said hesitantly. She might know something or be worried. Be careful with what you say, Dylan warned. We can't give any hints about what we're doing. Eva took a deep breath before answering. Hi, Mom. What's going on? Her mother's voice sounded tense on the other end. Eva, where are you? I've been worried. You left without telling anyone, and the police are asking about you and Dylan. Dylan furrowed his brow. The last thing they needed was the Armitage family coming after them, especially now that they had a plan in motion. I'm fine, Mom. I just needed some time alone. Don't worry, Eva said, trying to sound convincing. I can't stay calm when you're alone with him. Eva's mother exclaimed. Your family needs you. They want you to come back. Mom, I can't go back. Eva said, her voice rising now. They're not safe. You have to believe me. Dylan looked at her, his heart racing. He knew Eva was battling her own family and everything that represented. What do you mean by that? What do you know? Eva's mom demanded. Mom, please, I can't explain right now. But what they're doing is dangerous. I need you to listen to me. Eva's voice trembled but was filled with determination. I can't help you if you don't tell me the truth. Her mother replied, and Dylan felt frustration growing within him. It was as if Eva's mom was so caught up in fear that she couldn't see the reality. Look, I have to go, Eva said quickly. Don't worry. I'll figure it out. Trust me. As she hung up the phone, Eva looked paler than before. Dylan stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You did what you could. Now it's time for us to focus. He said, trying to comfort her. I just hope my mom understands and doesn't get involved with them anymore. Eva murmured, worry still etched on her face. Let's prepare for our meeting with the media. It's our only chance. Dylan asserted, deciding it wasn't the time to hesitate. ### the meeting. Later that night, they headed to a busy cafe known for its progressive stance. They were meeting a journalist named Theo, who had covered stories of racial injustice in the past. As they approached the table, Dylan felt a knot in his stomach, mixed with a growing sense of hope. Theo, thanks for coming, Dylan said, extending his hand. My pleasure. Theo replied, noticing the tension between them. What's going on? You both look serious. Eva took a deep breath. We need your help. What we've uncovered is going to shake things up more than just our relationship. It's about the Armitage family and their actions towards young black people. Dylan saw Theo's expression sharpen. Go on. With the recorder on, Dylan and Eva shared the whole story, from the invitation to the house to the revelation of the conspiracy. Theo listened intently, taking notes as they spoke. This is shocking, he said, disbelief washing over his face. Do you have any proof? Eva pulled out her phone and showed him the recordings and messages she had collected. Here are the conversations I managed to record. It's all we have. Theo examined the content, his eyes widening. This is incredibly valuable. If this gets out, it could make a real impact. We need to act fast before they catch up to us, Dylan said, anxious. They already have a foothold in power, and we can't let them slip away. Theo nodded, looking thoughtful. I'll start working on this immediately. We need to prepare a story that not only highlights your experience but also the risks other young people might be facing. As they talked, a wave of hope began to form between them. They were about to expose the truth and do something that could change the lives of many. But at the same time, the reality of their situation hit them. They were in danger, and the fight was far from over. We need to stay alert, Eva said, glancing around. We can't let them find us. Dylan agreed, the determination to fight for the truth burning in his heart. They were about to embark on a risky path, but together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The following days were intense for Dylan and Eva. While Theo worked on the story, the tension grew. The pressure to expose the Armitage family and their twisted conspiracy surrounded them, and with each passing day, the feeling of being watched became more palpable. However, there was a new resolve in Dylan's eyes. He was determined to fight not just for the truth, but for all those who had been victims of the Armitage family's actions. On a rainy day, while Dylan and Eva met in a local cafe, Eva gazed out the window, the storm reflecting her inner turmoil. Dylan, do you really think this is going to work? She asked, her gaze fixed on the pouring rain. We have to believe, he replied, holding her hand across the table. If we don't do this, they'll keep hurting others. We need to give a voice to everyone who hasn't been able to speak. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with emotion. I just hope it's not in vain. My family won't give up easily. Just as Dylan was about to respond, Eva's phone buzzed. It was a message from Theo. What did he say? Dylan asked, his heart racing. Eva quickly opened the message and read aloud, the story is ready. We'll go public tomorrow morning. We need to meet to discuss the details. Tomorrow? Dylan said, feeling adrenaline surge. This is amazing. Yes, but it also means we need to stay safe tonight, Eva said, her tone becoming more serious. What happened to you and your friends can't happen again. Dylan nodded, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Let's spend the night somewhere different. I know a friend who can help us. ### the trap. As they left the cafe, the rain had lightened, but a sense of danger lingered in the air. They headed to Jax's place, a longtime friend of Dylan's who had a small apartment downtown. Jax always has an extra space, Dylan said as he drove. He'll help us out. Arriving at the apartment, Jax greeted them with a worried look. Hey, man. What's going on? I saw some things on social media about you and Eva. It's a long story, Dylan said as they settled in. We're trying to expose the Armitage family, and we need to stay out of sight until the story is published. What do you need? Jax asked, concern etched on his face. I've got a place that's safe. Dylan looked at Eva, who nodded, and then he turned to Jax. We need protection. And if you could help us monitor what's happening online, that'd be great. Leave it to me, Jax said, opening his laptop. We'll get this done. While Jax worked, Eva and Dylan sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the moment. You know, I can't stop thinking about my family, Eva said, looking down. How could they do this? How could my mom side with them? Don't let that bring you down, Eva. You're stronger than you think, Dylan said, looking into her eyes. And we'll get through this together. ### the final confrontation. The next morning, Theo's article went live. The headline was striking, The True Face of the Armitage Family, a Sinister Conspiracy to Steal Black Identity. Social media exploded with reactions, and messages began flooding Eva's phone. Dylan, did you see this? People are talking about it. Eva said, her voice blending excitement and fear. This is what we need, Dylan replied, checking the news feed. But it also means they won't just sit back. As the day wore on, the atmosphere in Jax's apartment became oppressive. They could feel that the Armitage family was preparing to retaliate. "What are we going to do if they come after us?" Eva asked, concern etched on her face. "We need to stick together and stay alert," Dylan replied. "We won't let them catch us off guard." "Jax, do you have any idea where we can hide?" "I know a place," Jax said, deep in thought. "An old family cabin of mine, not too far from here. It's isolated and should be safe for now." The decision was made. They got ready to leave when suddenly, Jax's phone buzzed with a new message. He opened it quickly, and his face went pale. "They're coming. The police have been ordered by the Armitage family to find us," he said, looking at Dylan and Eva, terror-stricken. "We have to leave now." Dylan shouted, his heart racing. They quickly grabbed their things, ready to go. As they moved, the doorbell rang. Dylan looked out the window and saw a police car parked outside. "Let's go," he yelled, pulling Eva and Jax toward the back of the apartment. "We need to get out through the back door." As they ran, Dylan felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. They needed to escape before it was too late. However, when they reached the back door, they found more police officers blocking the exit. "It's a lockdown," shouted one officer. "Come out with your hands up." Dylan and Eva exchanged desperate glances, knowing they couldn't surrender. "To the left!" Jax yelled, pulling them in the opposite direction as they sprinted toward a side exit. Hashtag the fight for freedom. They were in a race against time, the shouts of the police ringing behind them. Panic set in, but Dylan's determination was stronger than his fear. "Here!" Jax shouted, pointing to an alley that led to a less crowded street. They squeezed into the alley, panting, when they heard a familiar voice. "Dylan! Eva!" It was Theo, rushing toward them. "I'm here." "What are you doing here?" Dylan asked, surprised. "I came to help." Theo replied, breathless. "I saw what happened. They're trying to cover it up." "We need a plan," Eva said, looking around anxiously. "We can go to a safe place, I know," Theo suggested as the sound of police sirens grew louder. Hashtag the end of the conspiracy. They ran to the safe place Theo knew, an abandoned warehouse nearby. As they entered, adrenaline still surged through their veins. Theo shut the door behind them, and they breathed a sigh of relief. "We need to figure out how to expose this," Theo said, looking into Dylan's eyes. "We can't let them win." "This isn't over," Dylan said, determined that no matter what happened, they would fight together. "You're right," Eva agreed, her gaze resolute. "We have to fight for justice, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been silenced." The atmosphere in the warehouse was heavy, but the group's resolve grew stronger. They had faced fear and doubt, and now they were ready to fight for the truth. Together, they decided they wouldn't let the Armitage family's story end without justice. As the morning light began to filter through the broken windows of the warehouse, they prepared for a new day of struggle, knowing that the fight for truth and justice was just beginning.